What's going on, everybody? It is AquaLeaderJesse back again with more Star Wars. Today we'll be reading Star Wars Tales of Enlightenment New Prospects Part 2 by George Mann. Last time, in New Prospects Part 1, a boy named Keth goes to his usual bar with friends Pirali and Muna. They bump into a prospector who is telling them the story of how her and a Jedi ended up going to a planet where they ended up getting eaten by monsters. I forgot that this series actually gives you a previously segment. Anyway, previously in a galaxy far, far away, a prospector taking refreshment at the Enlightenment Cantina regales the regulars with a tale of a deadly encounter with space pirates, a mysterious Jedi, and being eaten by a monster. Somewhat inebriated from the amount of blue mappa he'd consumed, Pirali blurted out, "What you're saying doesn't make any sense. You can't be eaten by a monster, then live to tell the tale." Saritha von Beale fixed him with a wry smile and reached for her own freshly charged glass of Retza. "And you know this because you've been up close and personal with the monster's insides before?" "Well, no, of course not," retorted Pirali. "That's not my point." He shrugged and glanced at Keth as if looking for support. But Cass could tell from the big grin that Celestin was wearing that he was as taken in by Saritha's tale as the rest of them. Oh, I forgot to turn on my ambiance. Probably want that. Oh. The prospector nodded. "Well then, allow me to enlighten you." Get it? Enlightenment. "But I'd rather warn you, it's not for the faint-hearted. Creighton finds none of the best tales are. Creighton finds none of the best tales are." Keth turned in his stool to see the Velorandi owner of Enlightenment had surreptitiously found himself in a position behind a bar, edging closer to better enjoy Saritha's story. He was making a show of wiping an empty glass, while old Chantho, the Ithorian barkeep, was busy fixing a steady flow of fresh drinks nearby. It was busy tonight. In fact, now that Keth was paying attention, he realized that the others around the bar had abandoned their seats and begun to gather in a loose circle around Saritha, all hanging intently off the prospector's every word. Keth shot Muna a glance, and she raised her glass in salute before knocking back the cloudy contents. Cynical as she was, even the Twi'lek was enraptured by Saritha's story. After escaping the pirates, even though they'd stolen most of your credits, you took Jedi Knight Lee Haro to the planet he'd been trying to reach?" said Keth, prompting Saritha to continue. "That's right," she said. "A place called Vexus." She shrugged. "It seemed like the right thing to do after the guy had just saved my life and gotten my ship back. And besides, he asked nicely." "Probably one of those Jedi mind tricks," said Muna, waving her hand before her face. "Forcing you to do stuff you didn't really want to do." Saritha laughed. "Haro isn't like that. I knew what I was doing, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into." She took a swig of her drink. "I guess I'd imagined there'd be some sort of settlement. A city, maybe. An outpost. But Vexus is just an uninhabited wilderness. Completely empty." She glanced to her glass as if to underline her words, and then placed it on the bar. Old Chantho reached over and refilled it, as if on reflex. "We touched down on a large, jagged outcropping of black rock, so slick and shiny you'd have thought it was glass. The whole place was covered in these immense stone cliffs, like spines emerging from the black of some gigantic beast. Not from a glimpse of civilization in sight. No buildings, ships, campsites, no habitation of any kind. The air outside was thick and rancid with the smell of decaying vegetation, drifting up from the steaming valleys below." "What did a Jedi want with a place like that?" said Pirali. "Maybe he was looking for an old Jedi temple?" ventured Keth. Saritha shot him an impressed look. "Not quite, but you're close. Haro told me there'd once been a set of Force users who'd lived on Vexus millennia ago, and so his research led him to believe. He was there to see if any trace of them still existed. And you decided to stick around, said Mina, just in case there was a profit to be turned? Saritha nodded, unashamed. Like I said, I'd lost everything but my ship. If there were relics on Vexus that could help me recover some of what I'd lost, well, it seemed like fate. Besides, when I'd agreed to take Haro there, I assumed there'd be some sort of inhabited outpost or station. Given the place was complete wilderness, I figured I couldn't just leave him stranded there, with no way off-world again. So you went with him to explore? Explore might be too strong a word for it, said Saritha. Haro seemed to know exactly where he was going. He led us into one of the gullies, from there deeper into the wilderness below. It was dark and overgrown. The vegetation was thick and pervasive, and even the rocks were covered in a deep purple moss. We used ropey vines to swing even lower, to where a fast-flowing river slashed through the base of the valley. It was raining, but we were sheltered by a canopy of leaves and branches that clung to the cliff walls. She rubbed the back of her neck, her expression pained. It was a perfect hunting ground. So this is when you got eaten, remembered Kath, wide-eyed. Nope, this is when we nearly got eaten, when the Strostodons came for us. What the hell is a Strostodon? Bungled Pirali. Something you never, ever want to meet, said Saritha. A giant bird about 3 meters tall that walks on 2 legs, has a beak that could take your head off in one snap. Muna blew a long, low whistle. I don't envy you. Facing off against one of those things? Saritha shook her head. Oh no, not one. They hunted packs. Kath shuddered. Haro was poking around in the undergrowth, Saritha continued, looking for the entrance to the old cave system. So I realized later. Like I said, he rarely spoke, so it was something of a surprise when he told me to edge back slowly without making any sudden movements. He'd sensed them coming, hadn't he? He knew you were in danger, said Kath. Saritha nodded. Anything about having a Jedi around, they've got a built-in early warning system. She pushed her stool back and got to her feet, smoothing the front of her tunic. But in this case, it wasn't nearly enough. The Strostodons burst out of the tree cover, 5, maybe 6 of them, screeching so loud I swear you could have heard them on Coruscant. Pirali was leaning forward on his stool. What did you do? What did you do? Saritha cocked a smile. I didn't even have a blaster. Not after the pirates had taken all my stuff. I just grabbed one of the hanging vines and started climbing, quickly. She frowned as if recalling something unpleasant. Now, like I said, those creatures were big. While they couldn't fly, they could jump and glide. She reached down, rolling up the leg of her coveralls. Kath looked down in astonishment at the lurid pink scar that had curled around the base of her calf. One of them caught me by the leg as I tried to swing into the trees for cover. Ouch, said Muna. Saritha nodded. I thought I was going to lose my leg, probably bleed to death there and then in the bottom of that stinking valley. That's when Haro did his Jedi thing. He used his lightsaber? Saritha shook her head. No, he hadn't even drawn that. He just stood there as the creatures converged on him, eyes closed, hands outstretched. For a moment I thought he'd simply reconciled himself to death. But then something weird happened. What? Said Muna. The Strostodons just stopped. Stopped? Echoed Kath. Saritha nodded. They just hung their heads and began making trilling sounds as if they were placid, peaceful creatures that never had any intention of eating us. The wound on your leg suggests otherwise, said Pirali. It does, at that, agreed Saritha. Haro told me later that he'd reached out through the Force to commune with them, to help them to see us as friends rather than food. She rolled her trouser leg back down over her boot. I only wish he'd done it a bit sooner. See, said Muna, wagging her finger. Jedi mind tricks. Suppose it was, in a way, said Saritha. However he did it, I was grateful to Haro. He saved my life. Again. So the Strostodons just left? asked Keth. Yes and no, said Sarita. See, it turns out Vexos is a pretty hostile place, and they weren't the only predators down there in the gully. Hiro had pacified the Strostodons, and with a flick of his wrist, he sent the entire pack on its way. As we watched them thunder off through the undergrowth, though, that's when the real danger presented itself. So, this is what you gotta eat, said Pirelli. I'm getting there, said Sarita, rolling her eyes. There was a massive rumbling sound, and then the ground nearby just erupted. The head of an immense worm burst out from the undergrowth, its pale flesh rippling as its fanged maw gaped wide. It grabbed one of the trailing Strostodons and swallowed it whole, and it simply slithered back into whatever home it had crept from, disappearing almost as quickly as it had arrived. I stood there, speechless and trembling. That was when Hiro walked over to stand beside me. Ah, he said with a broad grin. Looks like you found a way into the caves. What about your leg? Asked Keth. Hiro helped me bind it. Thankfully, the wound wasn't too severe, but I wasn't going to be running anywhere for a while. He explained that the worm was a parasite, one of the dozens of them down there in the valley, that had taken up residence in the cave tunnels, blocking the way in and out of the underground warren. Of course, the warren is exactly where he wanted to go. So you had to kill one of the worms, right? Offered Pirelli. Sarita shook her head. Hiro was a Jedi. The idea of killing an innocent creature was anathema to him. No, his plan was far worse. He planned to encourage the worm to eat us. That's insane, said Pirelli. Exactly what I said, agreed Sarita. But Hiro was adamant. The best way down to the caves was to follow the worm down to allow the worm to swallow us. You see, the worm was just one appendage of a much larger creature, like an esophagus leading down to the stomach below. His plan was to use it like a tunnel, let it swallow us, and find a way to avoid the pools of digestive acid waiting us below before exiting through the... well, you know. That's the ass for people that don't get it. In the name of the Force, muttered Keth. Sarita shrugged. I have to hand it to him. It worked. I'll spare you the worst of the details, but when that fleshy throat closed around our bodies and dragged us in, let's just say I'm still not sure I've got the stick out of my hair. The slime. She pulled her face. The muscles rippled and propelled us down the chute of his throat at some speed. Thankfully, Hiro was able to slow our descent with the force. We narrowly avoided the rancid pools of stomach juice, where our friend, the Strostodon, was already in the process of being digested. Beside him, Keth noticed Pirelli shudder. It was then that I realized several other worm-like throats all led down to the same place. It was as if the creature had grown inside the rock, filling the available space. We skirted around the acid, along another stinking tunnel where the walls quivered nervously at our presence, and eventually found our way out the things inside. Into the cave system, said Seth. Sarita nodded. Hiro was delighted, of course. Personally, I couldn't see what all the fuss was about. The cave showed signs they had once been inhabited, and a few primitive paintings smeared on the walls, the remains of a bunch of old pots, and a small chunk of rock that Hiro seemed particularly enamored with. He told me that he was on a quest, like Barnabas Vim and others of his order, venturing out into the frontier to search for new ways to learn about the Force. Although, if truth be told, I had no idea what anyone could learn from a few musty old caves like that. We were down there for a couple of hours while he recorded his findings before he finally managed to find us another way out. This time, via an old sect of carved steps in the rock, because I swore there was no way I was venturing back the way we'd come. We'd emerged into the light, covered in mucus and other unmentionable dirt, only to find there was someone waiting for us, blasters held at the ready. The pirates, blurted Keth on the edge of his stool. They'd followed us to Vexus, looking for revenge on Hiro for ruining their hold. What did you do? Gasped Muna. Me? Oh, I just put up my hands, closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Saritha laughed. Some people never learn, me included. She took another sip of her drink, leaving her audience hanging. And? Probably demanded impatiently. Haru whistled. Saritha smiled. A moment later, that flock of Strostodons burst out of the undergrowth. Those parrots didn't know which way to turn. What happened to them? Said Keth, scandalized. They took off in every direction. If they didn't end up as worm food, they're probably still there now. Saritha shrugged. Haru took their ship, headed off to continue his explorations elsewhere on the frontier. I had just enough fuel to make it here to Jeddah. She pulled a fist-sized hunk of rock from her pocket and tossed it in the air before catching it again. It seemed to sparkle as it caught the low lights of the bar. Haru gave me the hunk of rock he'd found in the caves as a souvenir, she grinned. I hope I'll run into him again someday, but somehow I doubt it. People like Lee Haru, they're once-in-a-lifetime sort of people, or they're a once-in-a-lifetime sort of encounter. So now you're stranded here on Jeddah until you can figure out how to pay for the repairs and fuel? Said Parali. That's about the size of it, said Saritha, though it doesn't seem like such a bad place. Can I take a look at that rock? Said Keth. Sure. Saritha tossed it over to him with a quizzical expression. There was nothing special. I figured I'd mount it in my cockpit as a reminder of Haru. Keth turned the rock over in his hands. A broad smile crept onto his face. This is pure kyber, he said. Holding the rock up so it caught the light. It's worth a small fortune. It is? Said Saritha. This will more than pay for your repairs, said Keth. Jeddah is just the place to sell it too. We could show you where. Saritha reached over and took the rock back from Keth, regarding it in a new light as she weighed it up in her hand. The old dog. He knew exactly what he was giving me, didn't he? Keth laughed. I guess he did. Saritha patted Keth on the shoulder. Thanks for the drinks, kid, she said, as she returned to her stool. Behind her, the small audience was peeling away as the other patrons went back to their own seats. Well, it seems you can survive being eaten by a monster, said Parali. And being kidnapped by a Jedi, said Muna. Keth shook his head. It was a good story. Thank you. Saritha tossed the hunk of kyber in the air, catching it again in one hand. She turned back to Keth, Parali, and Muna, and smiled. Well, friends, she said, looks like the next round's on me. The end. So I get choked up at the ending. No, something got in my throat right there at the end, of course. But that is the end of Tales of Enlightenment New Prospects. So that is going to be all for this one. And in the next one, we'll be taking on our first novel in Star Wars The High Republic Convergence, which is a phenomenal novel. One of the best High Republic novels, in my opinion. And we'll really start getting into the deep waters. So, thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Check out the links on the screen for more Star Wars read-along content. And if you enjoyed, check out Tales of Enlightenment by George Mann. Find it on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Hopefully check your local bookstores. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Goodbye.